Chapter 1. A Wedding is Arranged. Most people who knew Pauline Corrigan agreed that there was nothing in her to love and nothing in her to hate. She did not seem to have strong feelings about anything. Since her birth, Pauline had lived on St. Martin, an island off the southwest coast of England. Her father, a fisherman, had spent a lot of money to send her to school on the mainland. At 18, she went to a training college for teachers, and by 21, she found a teaching job in a town called Falmouth on the mainland coast. Pauline taught the children as well as she could, but after a year, she seemed worried about something. Mrs. Perry, her landlady, noticed the change in the young woman and asked her what the matter was.
"It has nothing to do with the town or you,"
replied Pauline. She seemed reluctant to say more.
"Then is it the pay?"
"No, it isn't the pay."
"Is it something that you have heard from home, my dear?"
Pauline was silent for a minute. Then she said,
"It's Mr. Winter, Kevin Winter. He's an old neighbor of ours on St. Martin's, with no wife or family at all. When I was a child, he used to say he wanted to marry me one day. Now that I am a woman, it's no longer a joke, and he really wishes to do it. And my parents say there's nobody better than him."
"Does he have a lot of money?"
"Yes, he's the richest man we know."
"How much older is he than you?"
20 years or perhaps more."
"And is he perhaps an unpleasant man?"
"No, he's not unpleasant."
"Well, dear, all I can say is this. Don't accept this engagement if it doesn't please you. I hope you're comfortable here in my house, and I like having you here."
"Thank you, Mrs. Perry. You're very kind to me. But here comes my issue. I don't like teaching." "Ah, you're surprised. That's because I've hidden it from everyone." "Well, I really hate school. The children are awful little things who make trouble all day long. It's so difficult to think what to teach and what not to teach. I think my parents are right. They say I'll never be a good teacher if I don't like the work. So I should marry Mr. Winter, and then I won't need to work. I don't know what to do, Mrs. Perry. I like him better than teaching, but I don't like him enough to marry him."
These conversations continued day after day until, at last, the landlady decided to agree with Pauline's parents.
"Life will be much easier for you, my dear, if you marry this rich neighbor,"
she told Pauline. In June, Pauline went home to St. Martin's for a short holiday, and when she returned, she seemed calmer.
"I have agreed to have him as my husband, so that's the end of it,"
she told Mrs. Perry. In the next few months, letters passed between Pauline and Mr. Winter, but she preferred not to discuss her engagement with Mrs. Perry. Later, she told her that she was leaving her job at the end of August, and the wedding was arranged for the first Tuesday of September. Chapter 2: A Chance Meeting. When the end of August came, Pauline was in no hurry to return home to the island. She was not planning to buy any special clothes for the wedding, and her parents were making all the other arrangements, so she didn't leave Falmouth until the Friday before her wedding. She traveled by train to the town of Hastings, but when she arrived, she found that the boat to St. Martin's had left early, and there was no other boat until Monday.
I'll have to stay here until the boat comes. It's too far to go back to Mrs. Perry's,
she thought. She didn't seem to mind this. In fact, she was almost happy to wait another 3 nights before seeing her future husband. She found a room in a small hotel, took her luggage there, and then went out for a walk around the town.
Pauline? Yes, Pauline it is.
The words came from behind her. She turned around and said,
"Oh, Edward, is it really you?"
He seemed almost angry with her, but he said nothing.
"I'm going home, but I have missed the boat,"
she said. He didn't seem interested in this news.
Still teaching. What a fine teacher you are, Pauline,
he said. She knew that was not his real meaning.
"I know I'm not very good at teaching. That's why I've stopped,"
she replied.
Oh, you've stopped. You surprised me.
"I hate teaching."
Perhaps that's because I'm a teacher.
"Oh, no, it isn't. It's because I am starting a new life. Next week I am going to marry Mr. Kevin Winter."
At this unexpected reply, the young man took a step back and said,
Who is Mr. Kevin Winter?
"He owns a number of shops in St. Martin, and he is my father's neighbor and oldest friend."
So, no longer a school teacher, just a shopkeeper's wife. I knew you would never succeed as a teacher. You're like a woman who thinks she can be a great actress just because she has a beautiful face, but forgets she has to act as well. But you found out your mistake early, didn't you?
"Don't be unpleasant to me, Edward."
Pauline said sadly.
I'm not being unpleasant. I'm just saying the truth in a friendly way, although I do have good reason to be unpleasant to you. What a hurry you've been in, Pauline. I do hate a woman in a hurry.
"What do you mean?"
Well, in a hurry to be someone's wife. Any husband is better than no husband for you, it seems. You couldn't wait for me. Oh, no. Well, thank God. That's all in the past for me.
"Wait for you? What does that mean, Edward? You never showed that you felt anything special for me."
Oh, really, Pauline?
"What I mean is, there was nothing I could be sure of. I suppose you liked me a little, but you never wanted to make an honest engagement with me."
You girls expect a man to talk about marrying after the first look. But I did mean to get engaged to you, you know.
"But you never said so. and a woman can't wait forever.
Pauline, I promise you that I was planning to ask you to marry me in 8 months' time.
She got very uncomfortable, and they walked along in silence. Soon he said,
Did you want to marry me then?
and she whispered sadly.
Yes.
As they walked into the fields, her shoulder and his were close together. The young man held her arm and said,
How strange that we met like this. You and I could be husband and wife, going on our honeymoon together. But instead, we'll say goodbye in half an hour, perhaps forever. Yes, life is strange.
She stopped walking.
I must go back. This is too painful, Edward. You're not being kind today.
I don't want to hurt you. You know I don't. But it makes me angry. What you're going to do. I don't think you should marry him.
I must do it, now that I've agreed.
But why?
He asked, speaking more seriously now.
It's never too late to stop a wedding if you're not happy with it. Now, you could marry me instead of him, although you were in too much of a hurry to wait for me.
Oh, it isn't possible to think of that. At home, everything is ready for the wedding.
If we marry, it must be at once. This evening, you can come back with me to Wetwood, the town where I live. We can get married there on Monday, and then no Mr. Kevin Winter or anyone else can take you away from me.
But I must go home on the Monday boat. What will they think if I don't arrive?
She said worriedly.
You can go home on that boat. The only difference is that I'll go with you. You'll tell your parents that you've married a young man with a good job, someone that you met at the training college. When I meet them, they'll accept that we're married and it can't be changed. And you won't be miserable forever as the wife of an awful old man. Now, honestly, you do like me, don't you, Pauline?
Yes.
She whispered.
Then we will do what I say.
Chapter 3. Pauline gets married. That same evening, Edward Stowe and Pauline Corrigan traveled by train to the town of Wetwood. Edward found a room for Pauline in a different house from where he was staying. On Saturday, they went to church and then walked around the town. On Sunday, Edward made the arrangements, and by 10 o'clock on Monday morning, they were husband and wife. For the first time in her life, Pauline had gone against her parents' wishes. She went cold with fear when she thought of their first meeting with her new husband. But she knew she had to tell them as soon as possible, and now the most important thing was to get home to St. Martin. So, in a great hurry, they packed their bags and caught the train to Hastings. They arrived 2 hours before the boat left, so to pass the time, they decided to walk along the cliffs for a little while. It was a hot summer day, and Edward wanted to have a swim in the sea. She watched him go down a footpath and run across the beach to the sea. She watched him for a moment, then thought about her family. They were probably not worried about her because she had sometimes missed the boat before, but they were expecting her to arrive today and to marry Kevin Winter tomorrow.
How angry Father will be, and Mother will say I've made a terrible mistake. I almost wish I hadn't married Edward in that moment of madness. Oh dear, what have I done?
She thought miserably. This made her think of her new husband, and she turned to look for him. He did not appear to be in the sea anymore, and she could not see him on the beach. By this time, she was frightened. On the beach, she called 2 men to help her, but they said they could see nothing at all in the water. Soon, she found the place where Edward had left his clothes, but by now, the sea had carried them away. For a few minutes, she stood there without moving. There was only one way to explain this sudden disappearance. Her husband had drowned. And as she stood there, it began to seem like a terrible dream, and the last 3 days of her life with Edward seemed to disappear. She even had difficulty remembering his face.
How unexpected it was, meeting him that day. And the wedding? Did I really agree to it? Are we really married? It all happened so fast.
She thought. She began to cry, still standing there on the beach. She did not know what to do or even what to think. At last, she remembered the boat, and going back home seemed the easiest thing to do. So she walked to the station, asked someone to carry her luggage, and went down to the boat. Just before the boat left, she overheard part of a conversation that made her certain Edward was dead. One passenger said to another,
"A man drowned here earlier today, you know. He swam out too far, they say. A stranger, I think. Some people in a boat saw him, but they couldn't get to him in time."
The boat was a long way out to sea before Pauline realized that Kevin Winter was on the boat with her. She saw him walking towards her and quickly took the wedding ring off her right hand.
I hope you're well, my dear. I wanted to meet you. What bad luck that you missed the boat on Friday,
He said. He was a healthy, red-faced man of 45, and Pauline had to agree, smile, and make conversation. Kevin Winter had spoken to her before she was ready to say anything. Now the moment had passed. When the boat came, Pauline's parents were there to meet her. Her father walked home beside Kevin Winter, while her mother walked next to Pauline, talking all the time.
I'm so happy, my child, that you've kept your promise to marry Mr. Winter. How busy we've been. But now things are all ready for the wedding. and a few friends and neighbours are coming in for dinner this evening,"
said Mrs. Corrigan in her loud, cheerful voice. Again, the moment for confessing had passed, and Pauline remained silent. When they reached home, Mrs. Corrigan said,
"Now, Pauline, hurry up to your room and take off your coat. Then come downstairs. I must go to the kitchen."
The young woman obeyed her mother's orders. The evening was a great success for all except Pauline. She had no chance to tell her parents the news, and it was already much more difficult than it had been at first. By the end of the evening, when all the neighbors had left, she found herself alone in her bedroom again. She had come home with a lot to say and had said none of it. She now knew that she was not brave enough to tell her story. And as the clock hit midnight, she decided it should remain untold. Morning came, and when she thought of Edward, it was more with fear than with love. Her mother called from downstairs.
"Pauline, time to get up. Mr. Winter will be at the church in half an hour."
Chapter 4. The Honeymoon. Mr. Winter did not worry about his new wife's coldness towards him during and after the wedding.
I know she was reluctant to marry me, but that will pass. Things will be different in a few months' time,
he thought. During the wedding dinner, someone asked Mr. Winter about the honeymoon. To Pauline's horror, he answered,
"Oh, we're going to spend a few days in Hastings."
What? I know nothing of this,
cried Pauline. Because she came late, Mr. Winter couldn't ask her where she wanted to spend the honeymoon, so he planned a trip to the mainland. It was hard to change these plans at the last minute, so she had to agree, and the next afternoon she and her new husband arrived in Hastings. Their first problem was finding a hotel because the nice weather had brought many tourists to the town. They walked from place to place. Winter, polite and friendly, while Pauline was cold and silent. At last, they found a great hotel, which to their surprise was empty. Kind Mr. Winter, who wanted to please his young wife, asked for the best room on the 3rd floor with a nice view of the sea.
"I'm sorry. There's a gentleman staying in that room,"
said the landlady. Then, seeing Mr. Winter's disappointed face and not wanting to lose a customer, she quickly added,
"But perhaps the gentleman will agree to move to another room, and then you can have the one you want."
"Well, if he doesn't want a view,"
said Mr. Winter.
"Oh no, I'm sure he doesn't. And if you don't mind going for a little walk, I'll have the room ready when you return."
During their walk, Pauline was careful to choose different streets from those she had walked with Edward, and her pale face showed how hard this visit was for her. At last, they went back to the hotel and were shown the best bedroom. They sat by the window, drinking tea. Although Mr. Winter had arranged for a sea view to please Pauline, she had not looked out of the window once, but kept her eyes on the floor and walls of the room. Suddenly, she saw a hat on the back of the door. It was just like the hat that Edward had worn. She looked harder. Yes, it was Edward's hat. She fell back in her chair. Her husband said worriedly,
"You're not well. What can I get you?"
Smelling salts from the shop near the station.
she said, her voice shaking a little. He ran out of the room. Pauline rang the bell. A young girl came. She whispered to her,
That hat. Whose is it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll take it away. It belongs to the other gentleman.
said the girl. She took the hat off the door,
Where is that gentleman?
asked Pauline.
He's in the next room, madam. He was in here.
But I can't hear him. I don't think he's there.
He makes no noise, but he is there.
Replied the girl. Suddenly, Pauline understood what the girl meant and whispered,
Why is he so silent?
If I tell you, please don't say anything to the landlady or I'll lose my job. It's because he's dead. He's the young teacher who drowned yesterday. They brought his body here, and that's why there's nobody staying in the hotel. People don't like a dead body in the house. But we've changed the sheets and cleaned the room, madam.
Just then, Winter came back, and the girl left the room.
"Any better?"
He asked Pauline.
I don't like the hotel. We'll have to leave.
She cried. For the first time, Winter spoke crossly to his wife.
"Now that's enough, Pauline. First you want one thing, then another. It's cost me enough, in money and words, to get this fine room. And it's too much to expect me to find another hotel at this time of the night. We'll stay quietly here tonight, do you hear? And find another place tomorrow."
The young woman said nothing. Her mind was cold with horror. That night, she lay between the two men she had married, Kevin Winter on one side, and on the other side through the bedroom wall, Edward Stowe. Chapter 5. Secrets Discovered. Mr. and Mrs. Winter both felt the honeymoon was not a success. They were happy to return to the island and begin their married life together in Winter's large house. Pauline soon became calm as she had been before. She even smiled when neighbors called her Mrs. Winter, and she began to enjoy the comfortable life that a rich husband could offer her. She did nothing to stop people from finding out her first marriage to Edward Stowe, although there was always a risk of that happening. One evening in January, as she was standing in her garden, a workman walked by along the road. He seemed to know her and spoke to her friendly.
What? Don't you know me?
he asked,
I'm afraid I don't.
said Pauline.
I was your witness, madam. I was mending the church door when you and your young man came to get married. Don't you remember? The vicar called me to be a witness.
Pauline quickly looked around. Winter was at the other end of the garden, but unfortunately, just at that moment, he turned and walked toward the house.
Are you coming in, my dear?
He called out to Pauline. The workman looked at him.
That's not your...
He began. Then he saw Pauline's face and stopped. Pauline couldn't speak, and the workman began to realize that there was a little mystery here.
I've been unlucky since then.
He continued, still looking at Pauline's white face.
It's hard to find enough work to buy food for me and my wife. Perhaps you could help me, since I once helped you?
Pauline gave him some money, hoping never to see him again, but he was cleverer than he looked. By asking questions on the island and the mainland, he soon understood that Pauline had married one man on Monday and another man on Tuesday. He visited her again 2 days later and said when she opened the door,
It was a mystery to me, madam, but now I understand it all. I want to tell you, madam, that I'm not a man to make trouble between husband and wife, but I'm going back to the mainland again, and I need a little more money. If your husband finds out about your first husband, I'm sure he won't like it, will he?
She knew he was right and paid him what he wanted. A week later, the workman sent his wife to ask for more money, and once again, Pauline paid. But when there was a fourth visit, she refused to pay and shut the door in the man's surprised face. She knew she had to tell her husband everything. She liked him better now than she had at first and didn't want to lose him, but her secret was no longer safe. She went to find him and said,
Winter, I have something to tell you.
Yes, my dear.
he said with a sigh. In the last week, he had been less cheerful and seemed worried about something. When they were both in the sitting room, she said,
Winter, perhaps you will hate me for this, but I must confess something I've hidden from you. It happened before we were married, and it's about a lover.
I don't mind. In fact, I was hoping it was more than that.
Well, it was. I met my old lover by chance, and he asked me, and, well, I married him. We were coming here to tell you, but he drowned, and I said nothing about him. Then I married you, Winter, for peace and quiet. Now you'll be angry with me. I know you will.
she was expecting her husband to shout and scream, but instead, Winter jumped up and began to dance happily around the room.
Oh, wonderful. How lucky. My dear Pauline, I see a way out of my difficulty, ha ha.
he cried.
What do you mean?
She asked, afraid he had gone mad.
Oh, my dear, I've got something to confess to. You see, I was friendly with a woman in Hastings for many years. Very friendly, you could say. And in the end, I married her just before she died. I kept it secret, but people here are beginning to talk, and I've got 5 big girls to think of.
Oh, Winter, 5 daughters.
She cried in horror.
That's right, my dear. I'm sorry to say they haven't been to school at all. I'd like to bring them to live here with us. And I thought that by marrying a teacher, I could get someone to teach them, all for nothing. What do you think, Pauline?
5 grown girls always around the house. And I hate teaching. It kills me. But I must do it. I can see that. I am punished for that moment of madness. I really am.
Here the conversation ended. The next day, Pauline had to welcome her husband's daughters into her home. They were not good-looking or intelligent or even well-dressed, and poor Pauline could only look forward to years of hard work with them. She had no hope for the future. But when Winter asked her a month later,
How do you like them now?
her answer was unexpected.
Much better than at first. I may like them very much one day.
She said, and so began a more pleasant time for Pauline Winter. She found out what kind, gentle girls these unwelcome daughters were. At first, she felt sorry for them, then grew to like them. From liking, she grew to love them. In the end, they brought her and her husband closer together. And so, Pauline and Winter were able to put their past behind them and find unexpected happiness in their married life.